Could the Islamic dilemma actually end Islam? For those of you that don't know, here is the dilemma. The Quran claims that Jesus was given the Injil, which is basically an Arabic word for gospel. However, if the Injil refers to the Gospels as we know them today, as Christians know them today, then core Christian beliefs like the divinity of Christ and the Trinity directly contradict Islamic teachings. So if Jesus was given the Injil from God and the Injil contradicts Islam, then Jesus was given a revelation from God that literally refutes Islam. Hence, Islam is false. A lot of Muslims actually see the difficulty here and say that the original Injil, which must have been Islam friendly, was either lost or corrupted. But this view actually runs into major issues. Not only does it conflict with other Islamic teachings about Christians during the time of Muhammad having access to a written Injil, it conflicts with documented history. The Islamic dilemma, as I see it, as I understand it, is basically the difficulty of defining the Injil in a way that is not problematic, or at least doesn't lead to obvious falsehoods. I'm Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity, and if you couldn't already tell, I've been diving pretty heavily the last few days into the so-called Islamic dilemma. I bought Campbell's The Quran and the Bible, and then also on the opposite side, the Study Quran. Investigating this issue is not like my experience investigating the so-called contradictions in the New Testament. There are typically very good, not too implausible solutions on offer. For example, let's look at the temple cleansing. So the synoptics place the temple cleansing event toward the end of Jesus' ministry during the last week, and then John puts it toward the beginning. The McGrews and other scholars have suggested a not too implausible harmonization here, namely that there were two temple cleansing events. Nothing in the text themselves or in history makes this solution wildly implausible. So if you think that historically Jesus cleansed the temple once, then plausibly he could have done it a second time, on a different occasion. But none of the solutions that I've seen so far in response to the Islamic dilemma, and I've investigated at least 7 so far from various scholars, none of them are even remotely plausible. Every solution is either inconsistent with other Islamic passages, or it faces serious inconsistencies with known history. Let's now look at one definition or interpretation of the Injil, and this one comes from Sunnis. So they say that the Quranic gospel, the Injil, is this tangible, written scripture that God revealed to Jesus, but then it got corrupted somehow. The problem is that this interpretation clashes with both the Quran and with history. Let's look at history first. So historically, there is no evidence at all that Jesus ever received or wrote down a physical book called the Injil that is separate from the 4 Gospels that we have in our New Testament. And even within Islamic tradition itself, you won't find consistent claims or any evidence at all suggesting that Jesus was given some distinct written text like in the way that Muhammad received the Quran. If there were, we'd actually expect to find some sort of defined theological framework within Islam about how this book was transmitted and why it supposedly disappeared or got corrupted somehow. But instead, Islamic sources are either vague or completely silent on this issue. But it gets worse. And I mean so much worse. When you dive into early Christian history, you'll see debates over which books should actually make it into the New Testament canon. So there's different gospels, different letters, and other writings, and these were all in circulation at the time. There were very heated intellectual discussions about which texts are actually authoritative. But here's the thing, in all of these debates, no one ever mentioned a gospel written by Jesus himself. Christians never claimed that Jesus left behind some written document, much less a divinely revealed book to him. The 4 canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were always seen as the best accounts of Jesus' life and teachings, written by his followers or those that were close to him. If there had been some sort of Islamic-friendly scripture like the Injil, as this view suggests, it would have been front and center in these canon disputes. A book directly authored by Jesus himself or something that was revealed to him would have been, for Christians, the most authoritative text imaginable. But there is absolutely no mention of such a thing in early Christian writings or in the discussions about the canon, which very, very, very strongly contradicts this idea that Jesus received some book that later got corrupted. Now, Muslims might argue at this point that this is an argument from silence because it relies on an absence of evidence. Just because early Christian writings don't actually mention the Injil, that doesn't mean that it never existed. Muslims might claim that the book was lost or corrupted over time, and that the lack of references to it doesn't necessarily disprove the Islamic view. In response, not all arguments from silence are actually bad. That's a misunderstanding. You got to look at each one case by case. They claim that Jesus received a divinely revealed scripture, the Injil, would be massive for Christians. If that book ever actually existed, it would have been like the cornerstone of Christian teaching. It wouldn't have just been mentioned or corrupted as a side book. There is no trace of any book like this at all, not in any early Christian writings, not in the intense debates over which books belonged in the New Testament. There is no mention of any book like this anywhere. Also, it's worth noting that in the Study Quran, it actually takes this line of argumentation that I just gave very seriously in their discussion of Surah 3:3, but I'll save that for another video. The point is basically this: if Jesus had been given a divinely revealed book, it would have been the most authoritative document imaginable for Christians. Christians would have been obsessed with it, arguing about it, defending it, but instead, nothing. Like, we get nothing at all. No discussions, no mentions, no trace of a book given directly to Jesus. The silence here is super significant because it's not just this little absence of evidence. It's the absence of something that we would absolutely expect to find. If the Injil actually existed, it would have been front and center in these early Christian debates. The fact that it's literally nowhere to be found casts, I think, very serious doubt on this Islamic claim that Jesus received a physical, divinely revealed book that was actually circulating among Christians. So we're still discussing the Sunni interpretation of the Injil. Let's circle back to that other problem that I mentioned, which, if you don't remember, highlights the fact that this view actually conflicts with other Islamic passages about the Injil. First, the Quran seems to stress that God's words cannot be changed or corrupted. Just look at Surah 6:115. So if the Injil is truly considered a material revelation from God, the idea that it was corrupted actually conflicts with this Quranic teaching. But second, and more importantly, in several verses, the Quran affirms the divine origin of both the Torah and the Injil, and even suggests that they were valid sources of guidance at the time of Muhammad. According to Quran.com, it states in Surah 3:3, "He has revealed to you, O Prophet, the book in truth, confirming what came before it, as he revealed the Torah and the Gospel." The word confirming here suggests that at the time of Muhammad, the Injil and the Torah were regarded as truthful scriptures that aligned with the message of the Quran. If the Injil had been corrupted, it would be pretty weird and strange to describe the Quran as like confirming it. Now let's look at Surah 5:47. We'll actually start in 46. "Then in the footsteps of the prophets, we sent Jesus, son of Mary, confirming the Torah revealed before him. And we gave him the gospel, containing guidance and light, and confirming what was revealed in the Torah, a guide and a lesson to the God-fearing." Verse 47, "So let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed in it, and those who do not judge by what Allah has revealed are truly the rebellious." So this verse commands the Christians to judge according to the revelation they received in the gospel, in the Injil. It implies that the gospel available to them, it had to have been considered a legitimate source of divine guidance. But if the gospel had already been corrupted, it wouldn't make a ton of sense for the Quran to actually instruct Christians to use it for judgment. In these verses, the Quran implies the Injil wasn't corrupted by the time of Muhammad was alive, which means that the most popular Sunni definition of the Injil conflicts with the Quran. So to quickly sum up the points so far, the mainstream Sunni belief that Jesus was given this physical book called the Injil, which somehow later got corrupted, it just doesn't hold up. Like, it doesn't hold up historically or even within the Quran's own teachings. Historically speaking, there is zero evidence that Jesus ever received some distinct, tangible book directly from God. No early Christian writings mention anything like this. And in all of the intense debates over which books should make it into the New Testament, not once does a gospel written by Jesus himself ever come up. If something like the Injil existed, you'd expect it to be the centerpiece of Christian theology, or at least to make it like in these disputes. But it's completely absent, and I think this silence speaks volumes. And then there's the Quran itself. In several verses, the Quran confirms the divine origin of the Torah and the Injil, and even suggests that these were valid sources of guidance during Muhammad's time. If the Injil was supposedly corrupted by this time, why would the Quran actually tell the Christians to judge by it? It just doesn't make any sense. And then remember, the Quran also teaches that God's words cannot be changed in Surah 6:115. So the idea that the Injil was corrupted, it doesn't align with other verses in Islamic theology. So at the end of the day, this view not only contradicts historical facts, but it also clashes with the Quran's own message. If the Injil existed as a physical book, it would have been front and center both in Christian debates and in Islamic sources. But instead, we get nothing, like nothing. And I think this is a massive problem for this view. But it's worth mentioning that this is just one view. Like it's a very popular view, but it's just one of the views. Again, I'm still very early in my investigation, so it is entirely possible, at least at this point, that I'll come across some solution that isn't just wildly implausible on multiple fronts. So if you know of one, make sure to share it below in the comments for me. Also, I plan to make more content on this topic as I continue to explore the Islamic dilemma. So make sure to subscribe if you'd like to join me on this journey. And then lastly, remember that Christianity is true.